Hello, I don't hear you very well. Mark, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, and we're live. Great. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the AWE Digital Wellness Podcast. I am your host, Marc Ritter, joined by my co-host, Christian Dominique. Christian, how are you
How are
doing
you doing
today?
today? I'm good. Thank you.
Perfect. Today, we're going to be talking, or more so reacting to a very popular Ask Reddit thread that gained a lot of traction, has 18.7 thousand upvotes, and very relevant to the All Digital Wellness mission. And it's a question for teachers. Is the Gen Alpha can't read, write, or do math crisis real? If so, how bad is it? And so some of the questions that we're going to be addressing here today is: what is the crisis? Where does it come from? What are some of the possible causes? And what is some of the data that is backing up the claim that Gen Alpha is struggling with numerical literacy, basic literacy like reading, writing, and a lot of other concerning trends that we've seen over the last couple of years. So thanks so much, Christian, for joining me. And yeah, how do you see this topic?
Very, very interesting topic. Can Gen Z read is also a question.
Yeah,
So it's not only for the younger generation. We having a crisis of literacy across the board. But I have been personally talking to a lot of teachers and principal that have told me that the way that they've been able to teach for 10 or plus years, and they're really seeing the degradation of cognitive
yeah.
ability, capacity to read, to comprehend, to write. And now there's a researching of writing, but it becomes sometimes very clear that it's generated by AI. So what's the real capacity to write? So it's a real
Yeah.
concern out there.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned AI, and it seems that this fragmentation of attention not only affecting kids is perhaps in part due to outsourcing thinking to AI. It's actually very common now. Well, most people actually use AI to write basic emails, and
Yes,
and and so what you're essentially doing when you do that is that you're think of like email writing as like a muscle that you're just letting atrophy in your head, right? Because you're constantly outsourcing it. So there is a cost to technology making our lives easier, right? In the same way that if you use DoorDash or Uber Eats every time to order food, you never really learn what it's like to go outside, go to a restaurant, pick up the food on your own, speak to a real human being. If you get that catered to your entire life, there's going to be perhaps some social faculties that are underdeveloped, and some other cognitive faculties that are impaired by that process.
clearly. And we know that as neuroscientists that we are, there's this clear adage that says the neurons that fire together wire together. So there is this neuroplasticity where if you're learning things and you're um, strengthening those connections, then that becomes your habit or what you can do better. And if
Mhm.
not, that's something called neural pruning. So as a child develops, they come with a lot of openness to create connections. And as the neurodevelopmental phase arise, we see that the connections become stronger and stronger, and some pathways are being
Mhm.
pruned. So it's like you're going in the jungle and you're creating a path of least resistance to go somewhere else. At first, the child's brain is not able to do much thing very well, but it's very open to do many different things. And as we learn, we start to develop those pathways, right?
Mhm. I couldn't agree more. I think I'm just going to jump in and read one of the top rated comments on this thread. It's coming from a high school physics teacher teaching AP, so that's advanced placement, so college level courses, and regular level physics. And he's been teaching for around 15 years now. And so, what he says that's really interesting reminded me of the discussion that we had on AI a few weeks ago, is that actually the AP and honors kids have not really changed in terms of their competency levels in academics, but who's
Hmm.
really struggling are the run of the mill non honors kids who have gotten really bad. They have very low tolerance for working hard, very short attention span, very short stamina for active listening. And this is a brain rotted, fried dopamine group. We can blame screens, the social media, and the parenting for this group. And it's that group that's most worrying because a decade ago, they estimated that about maybe 10 to 20% of kids out of school are like this. And now it's probably 40 to 50% of each graduating class.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, what do you think about though? I mean, that's boots on the ground sort of observation from a teacher in real time who's been working in academia, well, at schools for 15 years, saying that, 10 to 20% maybe 15 years ago, and now it's 40 to 50% of kids who are really struggling. So it seems like the trend we're seeing is that I don't want to call them the elite kids, but the kids who are most gifted uh, are essentially staying the same. We're going to have the same uh, chances, when applying to college. But the ones who are struggling are the kids who are not very gifted in school. What do
I
you think
think
about
that
that?
makes complete sense, right? And that's
Yeah.
thanks for getting the data. Everything is more granular, right? It's not a blanket statement that everyone cannot
Hmm.
read. It's let's see who and what, why, and how we can help, right? And is reading, we can also ask this to our audience and to ourselves: is reading important in 2026 going forward with AI and voice activated and all this? Is it important, right? And I would
Yeah.
argue yes, but let's figure out why and how, right?
Yeah.
So I think that trend is very interesting in the fact that we're seeing a leveling down of the people that are strong. There's more and more. So people that might have been average before, they're struggling, and the
Yep.
people that were succeeding, they found other ways to cope or to adapt, right? So maybe we need to figure out what they are so that the rest doesn't fall into the wasteland, right?
It almost seems like, and I've heard this discussed around AI before, but that AI is kind of uh, polarizing the extremes. So basically, the people who were struggling before will be struggling even more after AI, and the people who were doing really well before are going to just get so much more richer and
Yes.
profit from AI. So essentially, it's taking these two extremes and just pushing them apart even further. And that's same thing we're seeing based on like these Reddit comments that's happening in the schools in terms of gifted levels of these kids. So instead of like offering, leveling the playing field for everyone, as a lot of the OpenAI execs were claiming, or not just OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, it's actually just causing a much more unequal distribution. What do you think on that?
Agreed, and that's what we saw often, with technological advancement in many forms. If you have, for instance, the printing press, right? So one of the
Yeah.
first impression, right? So who had access to those first books, right? Was it everybody? The literacy rate was non-existing at that time, right? You would have monks copying or translating um,
Hmm.
books, and very few could read, right? So it took a while until the printing press was able to help the mass. And even that, do we argue that mass market paperback are all the same quality? Right? We can
Yeah.
talk about the quality of the fiction or nonfiction, and how that. So it's not just about reading. It's what are you reading? How? What? In what context are you comprehending? Are you able to have a succinct resume or a long discussion about what you just read? Or you can just say, I've read all the pages, but I don't understand anything, or it's just I went through it, right?
Right. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I will say though that through any technological revolution, well, not any, but most technological revolutions throughout history, when a new disruptive technology came out on the market, you mentioned printing press, for example. Um, I think it was a small group of elite individuals in the society who had access to the technology, who could use the printing press.
Yeah.
Or when you had the steam engine come about, it's not that every person had access to the steam engine. With this technological revolution, virtually everyone has the same access to AI. Um, but the thing is that people who, for some reason, there's two. outcomes of using AI. Either it makes you much more productive and efficient at your work, or it makes you stupider, right? And it seems like um, having equal access is not necessarily raising the tide for everyone using it, like you would have had everyone had a printing press or everyone had a steam engine back then. And it's just not the case that we're seeing. It's just a completely different sort of effect.
Very true. Yet, in that as well, there's nuances. So I think,
Yeah.
we had a guest a few weeks ago. We were talking about, the different levels of models, right? So everyone technically has access to AI if you log in with, whatever email or signal sign on. But if you want to have the more performing AI, then you
More performing AI will turn on your phone and call
yes,
you.
well, listen to you during the podcast.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly.
so the more performing AI will require money, and if you want to always be on top of the game, right? So there is a monetary access to AI, which is much less than the printing press or the steam engine, but there's still some divide, right? But I was reading some literature about education and digital divide, and we also had like, okay, literacy rate per country, and then cell phone or internet
Yeah.
access for many years in the 90s. Which country, how many percentage of the population of Canada, UK, or Uganda have access to internet, right? Is it only in the library? How much is it? And then it was smartphone, who has smartphone access, right? But I think, and when we're talking about this is kind of physical access to it. But I forget the authors. I can put them in the caption notes, or contact me if you want to know. But I was reading some article last week about how the access to the technology is no longer what's important. Is how you're using the technology, right, to build knowledge, to build connection, right, and that's becoming the real divide, right? Because everyone, as you mentioned, has access to AI, most to a smartphone, most to an internet today.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter what speed or what level of AI we have that, but now the access is starting to become, what are you doing with that? Do you have access to a system that's using the technology for your good, or is
Mhm.
it the technology using you, right?
Yeah. And I
And
think that
one of
go,
the
sorry.
theories surrounding that is the pedagogy, content, and context, right? So do we you want just content, because we can have billions of infinite content, right? Infinite scroll and all that. Um, Context is a bit more interesting, that there's nuance. And then pedagogy is learning, right? So are you using the technology to learn, or you're just consuming content or just creating content as mindlessly, right?
Yeah.
And that goes to reading, right? So is reading also an opportunity to learn, or is it just consuming books as well, right?
Yeah, and it's so funny that, like, reading books is now, like, virtue signaling. It's like, "Oh, I read, like, this many books this year," and people are like, "Whoa," but, like, back then, it was like, "You're a nerd or you're a weirdo if you read books," right? But now it's like people are almost boasting about, "Hey, look how good my attention span and my discipline is because I'm able to read this many books." Um, so, yeah, it's just a funny thought that came to my mind. Do we have any data on these trends, like, of declining cognitive levels, IQ levels of kids? Do you know if there's any data out there that, like, supports this claim?
um, you know IQ level is linked to genetics and neurodevelopment. So then there's epigenetics or expression of it, but I don't know of any trend that IQ numbers have gone down. So IQ is just kind of a neural correlate of your capacity to learn. But in terms of performing reading and writing, there are some data. I did not have some specifically for today. Did you find something
Well,
specific?
I think on one of the last po there's a lot of self-report measures that, show, well, what they do polling, for example, showing that around 50% of teenagers, uh, have a very negative or I would say critical view of AI, whereas, over 70% of them use it for homework purposes, and I will say that, I think we had a guest, was it Karag or Dr. The guy the guy from Morocco who was talking about AI to us,
Hmm.
It's telling us about how um, we need to teach kids how to use AI, and I think that's really nice. And I learned a lot from him, but still think that the net effect that we're seeing here in terms of rising rates of depression and especially anxiety amongst children should not be forgotten when we're talking about these new innovative technologies that are coming about.
And
So,
just to clarify, Mark, 70%, to reiterate that, of children use AI from homework. And I don't know if there's other out there, or if someone heard it and is going to copy some of the things we do. Our AI is telling kids that they will not do their homework, and we have prompted it properly to help you
mhm,
learn doing something on your own. You can have the chat coach to help you, but
mhm,
will refuse to actually do your homework. And that's something that
right,
we know from science that will help your cognition and your reading abilities and your comprehension
yeah,
abilities. And we just piloted this with 5,000 youth in Quebec. So far, so good. So go ahead,
mhm.
Mark.
Very nice. Everybody, check out our AI models, which are on alldigitalwellness.com. Um, what does the term brain rot mean to you? This is a very common one with Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
Yes, it's that you are losing your brain capacity
Yeah,
by engaging in some type of technology use.
yeah, yeah. It was named Oxford's Word of the Year in 2024.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, it's defined roughly as the supposed deterioration of someone's mental state from over consuming trivial or unchallenging online content. So it's exactly what you're saying before, for the purpose of consumption, or is it for learning, right?
Hmm.
And it's not recognized as a medical diagnosis, and that's partly the reason why we co-founded this company,
Yeah.
is because it's something like technology addiction or brain rot is not included in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for mental illness. But researchers argue it describes something real, especially for Gen Z. And so, for
Yeah.
anybody watching, Gen Z is born between 1995 and 2009, and Gen Alpha, who's born after 2010. Is that what's interesting about Gen Alpha is that that's the first cohort raised entirely in a screen-centered world, right? So, it's, actually the term itself goes back to Henry David Thoreau using brain rot in his book Walden back in 1854. I think interesting
Mm.
fact for anybody. So he's complaining about intellectual decline long before any screens existed at the time. Um,
Mm.
so, um, so yeah, I think we have over 4 billion, young people connected to the internet. Oh yeah, look at this. We got a nice. Exactly. So this study that I'm citing right now is it's done by Ahmed Fahmy Youssef, and
Mhm.
they basically posit that 7 hours per day is the average that kids spend on their phones, and you've got around 4 billion internet connected young people spending those 7 hours just on entertainment alone, right? And so for the youngest kids, the paper cites are certainly striking numbers. The share of 2-year-olds, for example, using screen media jumped from 10% to 38% between 2011 and 2013. And by 2015, three-quarters of children had their own mobile devices before age 4.
Wow.
So yeah.
Mhm.
So, we have terms like doom scrolling as well, which is very close to brain rot, but it's just scrolling, scrolling, scrolling forever. And it's linked to anxiety, stress, rumination. And 52% of the information in the most viewed TikTok videos actually was misinformation, according to this study as well. So it's not only that kids might be getting the wrong information, but it's the net effect of just doom scrolling, which not only causes these dopamine feedback loops, but also links to anxiety, stress, and rumination, and also, as began with, is affecting the jobs of many teachers who are struggling to help these kids learn to read and write in the classrooms. What are your thoughts?
I think that those statistics are, I guess, a little alarming.
Yeah.
But it's a trend that's also been building up through the years. As you mentioned, Gen Alpha was born 16 years ago or earlier.
Hmm.
Um, so we've seen those trends because of the use of low quality, addictive content in social media, or other methods like gaming, or other online activities, as you mentioned. I think we're seeing those trends, and we know there's some longitudinal data already that from 15 years that we see
Yeah.
more addiction, youth, more depression, more suicidal ideation, more
Yeah.
anxiety and anger, and less social bond and connection, right?
Right.
And those trends are kind of accumulating,
Hmm.
and I think that study shows that, and I think that we're not doing enough to reverse those trends. Yes, we've talked a lot about, you know, social media bans in a few places, or
Hmm.
school free zones. Yet that's not enough, right? We need to address this and not say ban the technology is bad. No, we just showed that for the people that are doing well, technology is enabling. It's good,
Yeah.
right? So it's more of how, not the ban. We cannot deal with it because people are using it already in the good way.
Hmm.
And if we're not using it in a good way, then that might be some of the consequences. And I do also want to bring this back to, like, how does that affect reading specifically, right? And is there differences between reading a physical book, reading a digital book on your
Oh
Kindle,
yeah.
or reading on
For
your
sure.
phone, right? Or on a PDF? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Oh, for sure. Like reading physical book is the best way to go. I mean, one just I like taking notes when I read, and you can people will argue, well, you can do that with the Kindle as well. But like I just think the experience of doing that with a book and highlighting passages
Yeah.
is just a lot more. Um, it's just much more tangible when you're doing it, and I think also, like, the brightness of the screen when you're doing it on your computer. I have the Kindle app on my phone, which I
Hmm.
hardly use, and I have the Kindle itself, but I think just the experience of a book and also, like, think about it like this, it's a great conversation starter if you're reading in public and you see somebody else reading, and you can just go
Yeah.
up to them and ask them, "Hey, like, I saw you reading that book," and that is like an invitation for connection, right? If I'm on my phone, people don't know if I'm, like, doom scrolling or if I'm actually reading or if I'm texting
Mm,
somebody.
yeah.
So, like, I am telling you I'm telling the public something about me, which is, like, I'm interested in this topic, right? The
Yeah.
book, I like that topic. That is a conversation topic to be had with somebody. You can approach somebody, and I encourage people watching this to do this. If you see somebody at a coffee shop and they're reading a book that you find interesting or that you've read, go have a conversation with them, right? But
I
when you
have
do that
done that
y yeah,
100
yeah, yeah.
plus time mark, and yes, it is rarer and rarer, but it is always a good, at least, a minute
Yeah,
conversation. What are you reading?
look,
Why is it interesting? Oh, cool.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. I made a challenge for myself for June that I'm trying to meet one new stranger every single day. And I find that the easiest place to do that is the gym or at a coffee shop. And for the reason that, like, at the gym, it's easy to comment on what somebody's doing without seeming too creepy about it. And then the
Mhm.
second one is at a coffee shop because, like, if you see somebody reading, writing, or doing an activity, it's easy to comment on that too. Um, Generally, if you're approaching a stranger in public, you should have like some sort of observational reason to do it. Like, hey, I saw you doing this, and I was
Yeah.
interested in talking about this, rather than like, hey, I just saw you and I had to talk to you, which could be a little creepier. But um, yeah, so getting out, going to the gym, going for a walk, going to a coffee shop, going to the park, and being very observant of the people around you and what they're doing, because there's a million opportunities for you to meet people out there. And maybe one of those could be a life partner. Maybe one of those could be a business partner. Maybe one of those could be your best friend. You don't
Hmm.
know, right? You have to put yourself out there. So,
Well, great observation and challenges. We're talking about theory. We have a lot of things, but we're also always, as a wellness coaches, experts. It's also about action, right? So can we have discussion and then go and do something, right? So happy that you had that challenge, and was it rewarding for you, Mark? If you want to share a few experiences.
I mean, it's rewarding in the sense that, when I did it today, that, the guy was super talkative and was very friendly, and I just realized, there's so many human beings, out there that want to share something with you, but they
Yeah.
also feel shy.
Hmm.
Perhaps everybody's kind of feeling the same thing, right? They're, like, all in their own heads, and, just getting out there and talking to people, like, that's how I met my best friend at the gym, like, a few years ago, and, I think, we met because well, we had a mutual connection connect us at a conference, but still, like, it wasn't Tinder, it was meeting in person,
It was
right? That
grinding.
brought Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, there's something to be said about that, and again, coming back to the original point, sorry, there's a ambulance in the background,
No
but
worries.
there is, we just don't know what the future looks like for Gen Alpha. We don't
Hmm.
know what, these stories that we hear about kids not being able to read or write from teachers, or the data suggesting that the cognitive decline is real. We don't know what that means for the future, and it's something that I worry about often.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I do want to pull out one study that I've
Mhm.
looked at, which tells us a little bit what we know.
Sure.
Um, this is in Nature's Communication, Windows of Developmental Sensitivity to Social Media, and that was in 2022 by
Yeah.
Orban et al. So Orban et al. Have challenged some of the views from Hayes and others that said that social media um, is disruptive, has all those effects. They are kind of a more neutral stance that sleep is causing, lack of sleep is causing more effects on well-being than screen time, is one of their papers claim. Um,
Mhm.
but then again, we can also know that screen time is affecting sleep directly as well, with the blue lights. But this is a study again from Nature Communications that shows that the relationship between social media use and life satisfaction, so subjective well being or life satisfaction, changes across adolescent development. Life satisfaction is not exactly, I study happiness. There's many ways to call it life satisfaction. Subjective well being, they're a bit different. But this one looks at participants from age 10 to 21. And it's a big longitudinal analysis of 17,000 plus participants, and it's a subsection of a larger UK database. So
So from the UK. Okay.
yeah, so what they found here is that the windows of development where, so it's saying that social media in adolescence uh, is not always linked to decrease life satisfaction. Uh,
Mhm.
it is specifically more, again, fine tuned to, in this data set. Males are also different than females. So males is 14 and 15-year old that they get more affected negatively with social media use, as well as 19 years old.
Mhm.
And for females is also 19 years old, but the onset is earlier, so 11 and 13 years old. Right? So 11, 12, 13. So this kind of shows again that we can look at some specific age and sex differences. Yet, as previous researchers that said that there is not strong evidence about social media screen, that there's some issues with the study and some are not replicated. In
Mhm.
this big data set, they show that there is a clear decrease in life satisfaction with use of social media. Maybe not at every year, but in general, we have to be very careful. And then,
Mhm.
it brings back to the topic of, are you using social media for what reason? Is it to look at a TikTok video
Yeah.
and dance and other, person that made you feel like you're not competent enough or smart
Mhm.
enough? Or are you using it for a pedagogical purpose? Are you learning
Mhm.
from social media? Are you
Right.
learning in a community, right? Or you're trying to learn alone and you feel that you don't understand this complex material? Are you learning at, in education, you talk about the proximal proximal development zone. So are you learning at the right difficulty level, or is it too complicated to you or too easy for you, right? All those things are kind of nuanced. It's not just tech is bad, social media is bad. It's how and what do you do with it, right?
I know we talk about social media a lot on here. Do you think there's like other possible causes for this going on in the culture? Like, for example, like some of the knock-on effects of social media is that kids perhaps are spending less time with their families or their parents or their
Mm-hmm.
peers. So it's like you drop something in the pond and then you have a ripple effect. So it's like ripples causing perhaps kids less time to spend with friends and family that could be consequential for their cognitive development.
Well, this brings me to an interesting idea that the question is, what is the opposite of distraction, right? So where people are saying they're distracted with brain rot and all that thing. So
Yeah.
the opposite of distraction is not focus, it's traction, right? Traction, distraction.
Mm,
And traction comes from the Latin trahere, and it means to pull, right?
mm,
So distraction pulls you away, and traction pulls you toward, right? So traction is like maybe passion, right? So you're attracted to this. You have a purpose. You're doing something, right? So instead of always talking about distraction, we can think about what is traction. And then there is this author that I came across, near Eyal, who talks about some of those ideas, right? So you can be scrolling, gaming, that can pull you, but you could also be reading, right? So do you have traction towards reading and learning, or do you have distraction towards everything else, right? Is it the FOMO? Is it, right? So in this first book, Nir Eyal talked about, it's called Hooked. He talks about him designing product to be addictive, right? And we know that the hook model works. So it's a four-phase loop, which talks about trigger, external, boredom, loneliness, emotion, FOMO, and
mhm.
then you're uncomfortable with those emotions, so you do an action, which is a simple behavior, and that will actually start to create, behavior, motivation, ability, and trigger, and that kind of lowers the friction, and you're gonna do like trigger action, right? We know also about Skinner's variable ratio. So the variable reward
Yeah.
will give you social validation, which is like the tribe, the hunt, which is curiosity or info, right?
Mhm.
Often that's what you get in social media, or the media is like, okay, well, you need to be informed, you need the feed, you need the info, right? Is it really quality info? No, it's just kind of the gossip information. And there's a reason for gossip, right? Gossip is to assure that there's no people that are kind of trying to bypass the community rules, and are liars or backstabbers, or right. So gossip has a purpose, although Buddhism and others say we should not gossip. um, I don't like gossiping, but I understand why evolutionary it exists.
Yeah.
And then the last part of the four phase loop is the investment, right? So um, when you invest time, data, content, your brain stores that and loads the next trigger, right? So you're gonna have, okay, I invested time in this. Now I see a trigger, action, variable reward, and that's kind of the loop how to hook people. So some say that near Eyal is a manipulator, right? So why, like, he understands how to psychologically control you. First of all, I would say that you're a manipulator. I am. Everyone's a manipulator. We manipulate people and ourselves all the time. We tell ourselves lies and stories all the time, but that's more complex and philosophical. But in practical term, that also means that we can use those same principle to reverse engineer that, right? So he wrote a second book in 2019 called Indistractable. So he reframes that and say, okay, now that we know that traction is the pull, and we can start to master our internal trigger and make time for proper action or traction, right? So, for instance, time box the calendar, for intention, for relationship, for work, right? So that that I'm intentionally doing this with purpose. I'm not just being distracted. I'm tracking to what I want, right? And then you can also hack the external triggers, right? So what is the price, what is the effort that you're perceiving, right? And you can prevent, we talked a lot about that, Mark, about preventing the distraction, right? Environmental design, time management, all this. And then he did a last book, and then I'll let you comment, but just wanted to finish on near Eyal. Just came out this year, Beyond Belief. So the thesis behind that is that beliefs are tools, but they're not the truth. I'm also writing a book called Beyond Spirituality. I did a lot of research on why people believe not only religion but limiting beliefs. Is the belief valid? Is it useful? And is it true, or different things? But what he talks about is understanding and being aware of those beliefs. And then the three powers of beliefs are that, yeah, one is attention, one is anticipation, and the last one is agency, right? So anticipation is the expectation, the dopamine system. Agency is the sense of locus of control. So you're motivated because you think you can have an impact and agency in the world, versus saying everything is externally coming. I don't have any control. I don't choose my life. My life sucks, right? So no, I can do something about it with small actions, with big actions, with purpose, with perseverance, with passion, all those things. And again, it comes back to the first, one, action and attention, which is what we've been talking about a lot. Do you have attention to read? Do you have attention to do things intentionally?
Mhm.
And again, preview for my new book coming out, which is called uh, "Don't Be Authentic, Pay Attention." Right. So all linked to the attention and what should we pay attention to, Mark, and what he thinks about some of those concepts.
Well, I think, oh, nice. So Christian's book listed here. Is it available yet? Can people
Pre-order. So reach out
pre-order?
at
Get your
awewellness.org and fill in the form.
available for pre-order. What should people pay attention to? I think is the yeah, fundamental question of our time, and it can start with being present in what's happening right now. Essentially, that's what you
Mhm.
do in meditation. You pay attention to your breath, and you try to pay attention to your heartbeat, to the sensations on your skin, and that is all real. It's metaphysical. It's happening right now in front of you, right? I'm not talking about the stuff that's on the screen because there's an infinite, endless source of information there. I'm speaking about, okay, what's happening right now in real time in your vicinity. And that's a way to train your attention by um, forcefully or effortfully focusing on things that seem mundane and boring, um, also known as vipassana meditation. So
Yeah.
just focusing on the breath and then with a few of my clients, actually, we're doing metta meditation, which is actually trying to focus on a beautiful memory or a beautiful thought of like giving, love to somebody, like hugging somebody that you truly love.
Mm,
That's a little bit more difficult though, because holding on to a thought people will find is very, very fleeting. You'll have like a nice sensation of a picture of you hugging your mom or being with like a puppy, but it just vanishes immediately, and thoughts are constantly changing in your mind, and you will find that like it's also not one clear image. It's just like maybe an unclear picture of, like, if I say to you, think of an elephant, right? It's not like a clear image of an it's like an abstract idea of an elephant that comes to mind for you, but like the general outlines, the shape, the the color. Um, And the same thing happens with thoughts. So thoughts are very difficult to hold on to, and that's the nature of it. And watching social media, going online makes it much more difficult not only to focus on the physical, what's happening in your body, but also on the mental and your thoughts. And I think there have been studies that show that doom scrolling essentially does increase activity in the default mode network, which is part of the brain that's responsible for producing thoughts when you don't think you're consciously thinking, but like just thoughts in the back of your mind that come up and getting internally distracted by different things.
Yeah.
Um, but what's worth paying attention to, spending time with the people that you love. I really liked what you said about traction, and I thought of momentum immediately. And when you
Mhm.
think of building up momentum, focusing on passion, I think is the right approach. But I think also I think people might get lost. I don't think follow your passion is necessarily the best advice, and I'll tell you why. Because I think passion actually develops from having forced yourself to get good at something and being rewarded for that thing over many years and experience. Um, when I hear somebody say follow their passion, I always think that, a tax attorney might be passionate about tax law, but they weren't born passionate about tax law. It's
Mhm.
something that they chose and they decided to commit to and they got good at, very skilled at, then rewarded, and then they became passionate because they realized that it's a very useful trait to be in, very useful towards society. So passion comes about after the action, not before.
I agree, and the passion in my framework is the one that is the probably the most complicated with patience, right? So, patience and patience and passion are a very good tool for happiness, but they're not to be sparkled at every situation, right? Compassion can be used 100% of the time, all the time. Appreciation can be used at any situation, but passion and patience have to be nuanced, right? So you can be patient, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to be actively pursuing something. But whenever the things that you expect are not coming, even if you have low or no expectation, then you can build up that patience, right? In terms of passion, um, you know, you can have passionate crime, right? Right.
Yeah,
So,
crime of passion.
passion is not just a blanket. Whatever you feel like today is okay, right? But you can develop kind of a deeper passion, and that's linked to what you mentioned, like purpose and perspective, where
Mhm.
you're building like a more like a slow burn passion that makes you wake up every day and motivates you, but it's not like the rage passion that like you've heard also the Gen Alpha call the term rage bait, right? um,
Yeah,
so like you can have that type of passion, but you don't want to have rage or anger. You want to have nurturing, compassionate passion. And thanks for
yeah.
that nuance,
Well,
Mark.
I don't know if you know this, but the word passion actually comes from the Latin word passio, which actually translate to suffering or
Hmm.
enduring. And so, originally it's actually I think the Latin verb patior means to suffer,
Hmm.
right? So for centuries, the word actually referred to strictly to physical or emotional suffering, right? And that's really, at the core of it, to suffer and to endure and to go on despite what you're feeling and to persist will develop into a passion.
Hmm.
It will develop into a passion, but it is a type of devotion to a goal or to an
And
outcome.
that's thanks for the etymology. And if you
Mhm.
think of like Jordan Peterson, I think
Yes,
he says like choose what you're willing to suffer for, right?
I love that. Yeah, no, Jordan has been monumental and is absolutely right. Like, what do you want to suffer for, right? What type of suffering are you willing to endure?
Exactly.
I think a lot of people are willing to endure, well, me personally, I'm willing to endure physical suffering at the gym. I like it. I enjoy it. For me, it's pleasurable.
Hmm.
Also in jujitsu, just getting beaten up in jujitsu, I enjoy that type of suffering. But there's other perhaps types of emotional suffering that people avoid
Mm,
consciously or unconsciously. And
100%.
patience, for example, is a type of suffering that a lot of Gen Alpha does not want to endure. Just the boredom, right? They can't endure boredom.
100% discomfort, border, uncertainty as well, and
Uncertainty. Yeah.
time. Right, it's like everything has to be right now. Yeah, I forget which comedian was saying, um, "I want this thing right now," and like you have Amazon, like it's like no, tomorrow, no, same day, no, no, now. Like I want to press the button and get the thing now, now, now,
Yeah,
instant.
yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
patience, guys, patience. Especially
Yeah.
for Gen Z, Gen Alpha. It takes
Yeah.
a long time to develop all those skills, and reading a book is actually, coming back to our topic. Reading a book is teaching you patience by default,
Yeah.
right? You know,
I
is it more complicated and difficult to read 100,000 page than to scroll on your phone? Of course, and perhaps that's the point, right? You have
yeah.
to get the knowledge, like be involved in the knowledge, not just like take it in. Like
Yeah.
this, when you talk about embodied learning, or real learning involves a mutual learning experience, not just a teacher saying stuff, or someone, and to that point, if you're listening live, if you want to interact, that's why we make those things live. If you have questions, we're here
Please
available to
drop them in
interact.
the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to quickly share another statistic. Hannah, could you pull up the second study that I shared? So basically, they did a study in China, and they asked 1,000, yeah, exactly, screen time in children, the relationship between preschool children's household screen media experience and executive functioning. So they took 1,014 parents of 3 to 6 year olds in China, and they are measuring executive function via parent brief P parent questionnaire. It was just a questionnaire that was administered to parents. Um, and so they found that heavier household screen media experience, so more iPad, phone, computer, correlated with worse of executive functioning, including memory, flexibility, self-control. Time spent, the emotional fallout of kids cutting off, and parents' own screen habits were all predictors. So we're not just blaming the kids here; it's also the parents, right, who are spending
Hmm.
way too much time on the screens. Um, so the effect sizes, and there was a little caveat to the study. The effect sizes were modest. The screen use factors explain only about 9 to 12% of the variation in executive function. So time is one factor among many, but perhaps not the dominant cause here, which, we spoke about before, that there are knock-on effects of the screen usage, um, like spending less time with your family. I think, that might be the bigger one, which is
and
just the deprivation, right?
and also reading less, right? So we talked about that.
Yeah.
Before it was, reading a tweet or whatever characters. Now it's reading, maybe not the full title of a TikTok video, right? And then big captions, and right. So that's not the way you sustain, very good discussion and cognitive ability to also cognitive, as you mentioned, executive function. One is cognitive, like computational power, that you outsource away now to AI, instead of, okay, what does that mean? What does that word make me think? And this and that, right? So if you think about reading comprehension, right? Gott and Thunberg talked about two things, right? Decoding and language comprehension, right? So can you decode something as complex as a book, or can you decode a 15-minute, very light Instagram reel, right? So that's the issue that we're facing, and as you mentioned, social media is part of it, and then there's the environment. So I also wanted to bring back, a study, an older study, 1986, from Stanovic, that talks about the Matthew effects in reading, right? So it's called the Matthew effects in reading: some consequences of individual differences in acquisition
Mhm.
of literacy. and that was in Reading Research Quarterly. And it talks about a new framework at the time, which is now known as the Matthew effects. And it talks about the effect of your belief in, like, do I believe that I'm a reader? Do I believe that I'm not a reader? Is my family readers? Are my friends readers? Right? And that is a bi-directional, organic, environmental construct, right?
Right.
So we're kind of saying, okay, well, if your parents are reader, if your friends are reader, then you're going to read. If you're having intellectual discussion with Mark and Chris, then we're going to do that. If your friends are brain rotting, then we're going to be brain rotting, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's almost like a contagion effect amongst
Yes.
the people that you spend time with. Very interesting.
And then I had another study that talks about empathy and theory of mind.
Hmm.
So that's a more recent 2013 study from Comer, Kidd, and Castano. It's called Reading Literary Fiction Improves Theory of Mind. So we've talked a lot about facts, knowledge, fiction. How can you understand a complex text? We talked about literacy, but it can be also in a plurilingual context. Are you able to teach your kids or put in the classroom different languages, people's home language? We know that there's a lot of, especially in Canada, first and second generation immigrants. Are we saying we can only speak English or French in certain part of Canada and not giving plurilingual competencies, right?
Hmm.
And so that's more in kind of the nonfiction realm of, can we understand a text, a concept? But this study talks about literary fiction, right? So it compared nonfiction, literary fiction, which is described as narratives, um,
Hmm.
and talk about inner feeling, um, looking at not reading, comparison to nonfiction, popular fiction, as well, right? So again, the quality of the book that you read is
Hmm.
going to inform, are you learning from it? Are you just being entertained? Are you consuming content? Are you putting the learning in part of it? And everything doesn't
Yeah.
have to be always learning. We can have fun. We can relax. We can be playful. I'm
Hmm.
not saying, read the whole encyclopedia, which my mom did when she was a teenager and didn't really have fun. So I don't
Hmm.
recommend that.
Yeah.
Go have fun. Go play outside. And you don't have to read the encyclopedia, but you can read things that you like. So again, the element of passion will give you something that you can suffer, right? So at first it's going to be tough if you've never read a full book, or if you had to do it for class and you don't like it, then at
Hmm.
first it's going to be tough, right? So you have to have something that you have passion for, and you have to have an environment around you, right? Once you have that, this talks about literary fiction being able
Yeah.
to do things that nonfiction or popular fiction are not able to do. And this is, when you're getting in touch to a character's emotions and thoughts during the fiction. And I wrote fiction as well, and writing it was actually this exercise of me putting myself in the character of someone that's not me. Then when you're
Mm.
reading, you're also doing the same thing. So that triggers your default mode network, as you know, in neuroscience. And the default mode network is one, the seat of the ego, but it's also the seat of the theory of mind, which means, can you think of the mind of someone else and try to be in their shoes, right?
Mhm.
So that develops empathy and perhaps compassion. And this shows that the theory of mind is increased only when you read literary fiction compared to nonfiction and popular fiction. Any thoughts on that, Mark?
I love it. I mean, there's something really to be said about the power of storytelling and
Hmm.
stories, and, um, sometimes I think that it speaks to us more to read a piece of fiction, right? Because it says something about the human condition.
Yes.
Like, um, I remember reading, Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky and thinking like, "Oh my god, this is like the battle that every human being faces, the battle of good and evil within every person." And, how this guy basically at the beginning of the book does a crime and then suffers for the rest of the book because of it. Um, I think for me, it was like so much more rewarding reading that than a piece of nonfiction, which nonfiction can be very interesting, but it's purely like it's facts, right? It can be autobiographical or just factual about like this is how you do that. But a piece of fiction, right? That storytelling element, I think it just gets lost so much in our culture, and I think that's why like the stories from the Bible or a lot of ancient texts are so appealing to people because
Mhm.
they human nature doesn't change that much actually throughout thousands of years of history, right? So it's you can relate to what people experienced back then.
Very true. And as I mentioned, earlier in the podcast, once you start to understand the psychology behind it, right? So we are constantly telling ourselves stories, telling others stories. We are relating true stories, right? Most of them are not really true. They're just stories related to something that's the approximation of the truth. That's why we can be easily manipulated much more than we think. And that's why we're afraid of intelligence and manipulator, right? So one of the things in times of like social media and popular culture is like if you're with someone in your relationship that's manipulating you, then it's the worst thing in the world. It's like, no, actually, you
Yeah.
can manipulate people. You're always manipulating yourself and other people, but can you do it for a good cause, for a cause that is enhancing compassion, comprehension, openness, flexibility of thought, right?
Well,
So
nowadays they call it influencing.
yeah, exactly, right. Influencing is
Influencers.
manipulating. Yeah, you're right. That's exactly what it is.
Influencer.
So you're gonna influence for good or not, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So I have two more piece to show. One is about Read Aloud Handbook, which is now as its eighth edition. So especially if you're a parent, a teacher, and especially for grade school, we want to kind of reiterate the fact that we talked about the environment. Are you reading next to your children? And also we want to take away the guilt from the parents, right? Mark, you said maybe I'm the parent on my phone and maybe I'm not
Yeah.
modeling, right? So it's not about guilting. It's about also being able to tell your child or your teen or your grown up adult even, hey,
Mhm.
I am not perfect either. I wish I could read more. I'm still sometimes on my phone, but let me try first, right? And
Mhm.
maybe the children's going to read more and encourage the parent to read as well because they're going to find something that's cool and they're going to talk about it, right? So it's kind of created this emotion like reading together is something that people forget, right? You don't have to read the same thing. Sometimes it's fun. I used to
Yeah.
make reading challenge with my son, and we would read the same book and talk about it, right? But all those things increase human connection. Like we were reading fiction, we were talking about the characters. Actually, one of the book that we read together was Hail Mary, which just turned into a movie this year, which I'm excited to see.
Nice.
So there's a lot of things that you can do in family. You see this picture, like family together, and also reading out loud, right? Also, if you're in a couple, right? Be in bed with your spouse and read to each other. Like I actually read Crime and Punishment with a girlfriend some time ago, in
Mhm.
right. So like and out loud, right? And so like as a couple, as a family, as a children that need kind of the guidance from parents, reading out loud is something that we forget to do. What are your thoughts on that, Mark?
I think reading out loud, just the act of coming together, right? It's, breaking bread, essentially.
Yeah,
This I know I'm not very religious, but I brought up religion quite a few times in the podcast, but, like, the act of just coming together every Sunday or once a week in a church sort of communal setting is so important, and I
yeah,
think
yeah,
reading, not just to yourself, but reading out loud to others is similar, like, union of family members coming together, communicating with each other, so important for child development and for kids, for the entire family, for connection, bonding. All these things are very integral. And no, I 100% agree that like reading out loud is. I'm not a parent yet, and maybe you can attest to this. It must be just a very precious moment to spend with your child and to read to them before they go to sleep. And
yeah.
um,
And you get to
mm,
practice the four, so speaking, listening, writing, reading, right? So that's the whole
mhm,
linguistic. and then you can do it in multiple language. If you have, mixed household, or more than one language, which I know you do, right? So it gets interesting to have you read in different language, you talk, you read, you listen, you make them read, and as they grow up, like you can read it at adulthood. Like I said, like two grown adults can read to each other. You can
Mhm.
read poetry to each other that might be romantic. You can read the book that you want together. And I've been doing that a lot in my life, and I can say that those are some of the moments that I remember the most, reading out loud with someone that you care about,
Right.
right?
These
And as you
beautiful
mentioned,
moments.
it's a form of community, which can be religious or non-religious, and community is part of the 14th catalyst of happiness in our framework. So how can we at AWE bring communities together? Well, through podcasts, through guests, to communication, conversation.
Yeah.
We're working with NGOs, we're working with HR departments, we're working especially with schools and parents, and saying again, why is the school and parents separate, and then student? How can we bring all those together? We're going to have a special guest next week that we're talking about how can the school be also implemented in the community physically, the architect, the urbanism. Is there a park nearby that's used, on the weekends as well, or is closed
Mhm.
full day? All these things are kind of how can we create stronger connection, as you mentioned, and community.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go to the last article I brought, which is very recent, 2026, in the International Journal of Education, and it's from Al Marie et al., which looks at Arabic language teachers, um, and looks at different things than we've talked before. So I thought it was interesting. So that's in Oman. I love Oman, beautiful country. Remember seeing dolphins there, and
Oh,
beautiful mosque. And went into going. We were talking about art. I went to the opera there, and it was very nice. But this study looks at a sample of male and female Arabic language teacher. And what I found very interesting is that they're looking at why um, are the reading and writing assignments worsening, right? Low
mm,
reading and writing proficiency among students, and this is grade 3 to 8, right? So we're in, and again, this is in Oman. So we're seeing reading skills and writing everywhere decrease. Of course, social media, internet, AI, we've talked about that. But here it highlights um, the most influential factor was the limited parental follow up, 95%, weak family school cooperation, 94%, and parents' lack of strategies to address their children's learning difficulties, 91%. Okay. So this is exactly what we've been talking about. And these are numbers that show that, it's not just AI, it's not just social media. Let's get the parents involved. Let's get the school involved. Let's get the community involved. Let's work together. And the last one, let's give them adequate strategy. They lack strategies to address that, right? So, what are your thoughts on that, Mark?
missed invited parental follow-up. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, giving kids more opportunities that they're not getting in order to connect with each other. And it's not that they don't have the opportunities, it's just that they perhaps are not, mm, they're not noticing them because they're on their phones so much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I 100% agree with the study. And I think that there's a lot to be said about how do we create a lasting shift and change in our culture, right? And this is exactly what all is doing. This has been the mission of all since the beginning, is like how do we just transition from just having a conversation about this to actually taking action so that we can protect the next generation of kids who are coming about who might be most affected by this issue of screen addiction.
Yeah, screen addiction is at the center. Reading and many other things, cognitive abilities, writing abilities, are all linked to this new world.
Hmm.
And some would we talked about brainwash, but some would say like there's also this term called um, screenagers, which are teenagers with a screen that are glued with their screen. Um, and there's also kind of this idea of skimming default, right? So scrolling, doom scrolling, skimming, everything is super like fast and surface level. How do we go deeper, and how do we encourage the conversation to go deeper? One of the good things I would say in social media lately is that before, podcasts over an hour were rare, and now we can have deeper 2, even 3, sometimes 4 hours. Exceptionally, we can see people are actually looking for deeper conversation, going deeper into topics, deep dives, as some call them.
Hmm.
And how can we kind of reconcile this kind of skimming default to deep reading and active sense making?
Well, I think it's hard to achieve that in isolation,
Hmm.
and yeah, I think an openness to connect with others in public and to encourage these sort of conversations between family members or peers, right? That it's okay to confide about things that you feel scared about and make yourself a little bit more vulnerable to your friends. Um, it does. I think it's going to get to the point where people are so fed up, and I think we're already seeing this, that they're going to start that the pendulum is going to start swinging the other direction of deeper conversations and deeper connection with other people.
Yeah. Um, when we're looking at what the parents can do, I also want to encourage people not to feel guilty, right? It's not just about the
No.
parents. How can we have a community? How about the uncles, and why do we call our friend's uncle? Actually, I was reading about this. When they say, "Hey, Uncle Bob," but he's not really your uncle. You're saying this, because it's the genetic saying. Well, if he's the uncle, then maybe he has similar genetics as in the family, right? So 1/8 of the genetics, so he'll be more likely to protect my children, right? So that's an interesting fact. That's why we call uncle, or in French mon oncle,
Mhm.
in Spanish tio tia, is to kind of like approximate the kinship, the blood, biological genetic
Right.
kinship, to use those words. But in terms of what that means is actually, can we create this fake kinship? Again, some people will say bro. What's bro? Brother, right? How can
Mhm.
we create this community where you don't have to be like the immediate nuclear family, two people, or one single parent taking all the burden, where we
Mhm.
can create a more engaging community. It could be grandparents, uncle, community, neighbors, school, or bring digital wellness in your community as well.
Right.
And we have an international community to kind of bring all those pieces together and say, you're not alone. Although we have a crisis of loneliness, by our tools, by our communication, by our resets.
Mhm.
We talked about types of meditation, types of nervous system reset. We can create awe experience. We can create connection and belonging with some small audio, and we can actually be there in person or virtually to help you in your community, right? So I think, like, when parents feel like, I'm stuck, I'm not a good parent, I cannot do this alone. Well, probably you don't have to, and you shouldn't, right?
No, you don't have to go on this journey alone, and I know it can feel overwhelming for a lot of parents who are watching this, and that's normal. And there's huge communities. I think Jonathan Haidt has really created a big community of parents around this, especially with his book, The Anxious Generation. That um, parents, like you don't have to suffer alone. Like there's a lot of communities out there, and there's a lot of resources for you to take advantage of. If you go on alldigitalwellness.com, you can find a lot of resources as well there on parenting. And I think one of the worst things you can do is to isolate or alienate yourself further and think that you're the only one suffering. It's not that way. It's not the case.
Yeah, and also it's not about blaming your children. Like, you're lazy, you don't have willpower. Are you do you have ADHD, or not? Are you um, trying to skip class, or not do this, or not read, or not do your assignment, or do AI? those things are all things that are going to happen, right? It's about being like realistic about what's happening in the real world today, right? So
Hmm.
some parents don't want to talk about sex. They think that sex doesn't exist, but the kid is born from that, right? Some people
Right.
want to say that AI is not good for kids. Well, no, all kids are using AI, and they
Hmm.
will. Or social media doesn't exist. We have parental control. No, we know that they use other kids' phone or social media, create a third Facebook account or Instagram. So we all
Hmm.
know that, like, the more you're aware, the more you know that you're lying to yourself, as we talked about, right? So
Hmm.
once you're able to admit that those things are part of reality, and yeah, maybe even to your kid, which you think is perfect, or the demon, right? Always black or white, often, but it's also it's nuanced. And instead of saying, well, you can't focus, well, your homework is this or your grade is that, how can we create those environments? We talked about reading as the main thing, but it can be reading, it can be math, it can be going outside. But it comes back to the fact that you want to have this open, flexible conversation with your children, your family, your school, your community, so that we can all do together a bit better, right?
Yeah, I mean, it again, it starts with actually having a conversation about this, and I know if you're watching the podcast, you might feel like, "Yeah, I know this is right," but it's like, actually commit to doing something to change the environment that you're in or change the other people around you, to take action, because it's so easy to listen to what Christian and I are saying and then to go back into the rhythm of your life and not do anything about it, right? I emphasize this with all of my clients. I say, all most of the therapy happens between the sessions. You have to take action. It doesn't happen in the 1 hour that we talk to each other.
100%. It's practice, and practice will reinforce the circuits,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
going to be difficult at first. Like, don't
Of
think
course.
that you
There's
can
gonna be a lot of
become a
resistance.
reader and
Yeah.
say, okay, I've read those books, and not to post it on social media or say, oh, I'm so great, but just because you start to enjoy, it's like, well, yeah, I want to I want to carve out some time in my day,
Right.
instead of spending 6 more hours on social media that are not really purposeful. Can we carve out 5 hours to read and 1 hour to go outside, or whatever ratio that you want, right? And can we
Absolutely.
do this as a family? Can we create those opportunity, right? Can I go
Mhm.
to a park bench and read? I mean, I when I'm in a park bench reading for an hour, I think there's not much more that I want to do, right? It's kind of very nice place to be,
Right.
but I don't see many people doing that, or having the ability to even think about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, just sitting on a park bench and not doing anything, not trying to use your phone or get, just enjoying the stillness.
Hmm.
It's a good challenge for anybody who's watching. Go to a park bench and just sit and observe what happens.
So there's some very interesting, things related to language and um, neuroscience. I was listening to another podcast lately that was talking about how language evolved, how verbal and eventually written language evolved. It seems like it's related to singing. So we know that other um, animals, including birds, um, can sing, and they can recognize the sound, and they can
Mhm.
communicate through singing. So humans have that kind of same ability, but then it became more and more complex as we wanted to go from just signaling danger to more complex ideas of community and building things together, and abstract concept, right? And now there's this other theory of neural recycling from cognitive neuroscientist Stanislas Dehaene, who looks at the specifically left but the fusiform gyrus part of the brain, and it says that it originally evolved from recognizing faces in object, and then it was expanded to include language, right? So, and then the reading is actually you can capture signals with that recognition system, so you're actually not probably reading every word. You probably saw some psychological tests where people can trick you into reading things that don't exist or not seeing things, right? So you're reading very fast, and then I took some computational neuroscience class, and we can calculate how the saccades work in the eyes, and how
Yeah.
you read the lines. So, reading is linked to your brain, and if you do it, you're gonna keep your brain active. We know that also older people. We're talking about youth, but older population, the more they read, the more they stay cognitively active, the less chance of dementia and Alzheimer's do they have as well, right?
100%. You have to train it. If you don't use it, you lose it, right? You got to stay active. And that's the whole point here is that you don't outsource too much, that you just lose all capacities.
And then Marianne Wolf talks about, again, you're differentiating like fast skimming and deep reading. So
Mhm.
Wolf calls this deep reading that it's not only decoding the words, but it's inference, analogy, critical analysis, perspective taking, and as we mentioned
Yeah.
before, empathy, depending on what and how you're reading it, right?
Developing the empathy, developing the passion based on what you're reading and interests in the reading, of course, in the topic of what you're reading. Um, I don't really believe in like forcing yourself to read a book just to say that you've read a book. Like
Yeah.
you can read you can read like the beginning and like if it gets boring and you just generally don't find it interesting, you find another book, right? Find another book to read. And I've started many more books and not finished them than I've actually finished entire books in my life.
And that's okay because it's not about like try harder, finish the book, um, comprehend it. It's like, no, find something. And we talked about the Matthews effect, right? So find something that makes you feel like you're enjoying reading, and eventually you're going to enjoy reading. And then maybe you come back to a book that was difficult or that you didn't like, and restart it. And then maybe it's still trash. Then you give a 1-star review on Amazon and move on,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah. I wonder if writing is gonna change over the next couple of years to become more shorter and terse and less like I wonder if we're gonna lose the essence of a lot of writing because of media.
Oh, I think it's already started, right? So
Yeah,
apparently, book sales are still doing okay somehow. I think
yeah,
many people are, doing like you. They bought a book, but they're not actually reading to the end. But
yeah,
jokes aside, I think that writing is changing. There's authors that are, clearly stating that they're using AI to write, and that can be useful and not. Is the style going to start to to be um, more uniform? Well, which social media normally does, right? The memes become everyone's listening to the same song, doing the same dance, right? So are we writing like is it going to become like we talked about the study popular writing or literary writing, right?
right,
Or quality nonfiction or pop nonfiction, self help
right.
book that is helpful or some that are just popular, right? So those I think are the questions that remain. I think that AI is not able to decipher those things well enough. I think right now you can make a prompt to create a gazillion books, and probably some AI data center can do that.
Yeah,
But who's going to read them? Other AIs or humans, right? So I think we talked about the stories. Is the story sounding like authentic or real or right? So
mhm,
I wrote fiction. Now I'm writing nonfiction. The book that we just talked about. Don't be authentic. Pay attention. So it's not only
mhm,
about feeling or like this authenticity, which is like my true self, and authentic is not really. You don't have to be authentic. You have to pay attention to what's going on. And are you there to do it in a way that's not only sounds like human, but that is human, that is flawed, that are stories that have been
right,
integrated and that are coming out probably modified, but that are still human story and experience. And I think that's going to be probably what's keeping um, the writing from going into, well, no one's going to write anymore. Every like we can say that with jobs, we can say that with video editing, right? AI can edit the video, it can create a new video, can create whatever we want. But are we still having that human element? um, and is it enough to convey, like, does someone who's listening to us now care more that we're two human beings struggling to figuring out what we're talking about or they want a polished AI version of this podcast that sounds probably nice
Yeah,
now that we
probably
have the
not.
good
No.
voice, but is it really thought? Is there really thought behind that, or is it just random competition that has errors in them, right? And we have errors in our podcast, I'm sure, but that's the human
Yeah,
part, right?
but that's what makes it human.
Yep.
Exactly. Agreed more. Lots of errors. Um, Anybody who hasn't dropped a question in the chat, please do so now. We're always open to hearing your questions and trying to answer them to the best of our knowledge, although maybe we can't if it's a question about Gen Alpha and the declining literacy rates, or perhaps about the benefits of reading and or some of the other studies. Please just feel free to drop a question in the chat. Um,
So my question to you, Mark, is we talked a lot about the dopamine detox or dopamine heat. They're very like pop culture again, but most people don't really understand the complexities of the multiple dopamine circuit, which is not only the reward motivation circuit, but there's others, including motor circuits. And the neurotransmitter. I was just in a neuroscience conference talking about astrocytes and not only neurons, right? So it's way more complicated than everyone's saying dopamine. Okay, now how could you conceptualize what we would say like the unpredictable prediction of reward, um,
hmm,
variable
yeah,
reward idea
yeah.
with dopamine with reading? Like, how can we help people
Hmm.
enjoy reading using those same circuits that are being hijacked by, let's say, social media and technology?
Yeah. Well, I have to say the times that I've enjoyed reading most is when, like, you have, like, a surprise, something unexpected happen in the story. I
Hmm.
remember the book, The Kite Runner by,
Yes.
yeah, Hosseini, I think, is an Afghani, a beautiful book, but there was one part of the book I literally stayed up the entire night. I was, like, 19 when I read it. I stayed up all night reading that book because there was just one thing, a passage after another that was just so unexpected, and it just blew my mind, and I got angry, and then I got happy and sad, and I just went on a roller coaster of emotions reading this book. So
Hmm.
variably, right? I just unexpected, and I think, dopamine is released, right, when you have some sort of unexpected occurrence happen in the environment, and that's how it keeps us hooked. So um, I definitely recommend The Kite Runner. There's a few other books that have like big like plot twists and that will hook you, and keep you reading them.
Yeah, I think it's the element, another of the seven C's, curiosity. How can we keep the curiosity involved for the reader and the reading and the writer, right? So, um, as I mentioned, I did manage the very difficult feat to get my preteen and teenager to read after he wasn't reading for a long time, and it came with me being present, with active, with communication, and with curiosity, right? How can we want to read something and read the next chapter and see what happens and understand the people or the content in it? And I wanted to kind of contrast that with Gloria Mark of UC Irvine, who wrote Attention Span. So
Hmm.
she mentioned that the average time people stay focused on a single screen is now half a minute, or 47 seconds actually, and it was 2.5 minutes 20 years ago, right? Which is still low, but now we're going from one, two, three, four, five screens. We're not on a book. Are we reading something? Are we messaging? So 47 seconds is pretty much, the average attention span. And how does that compare to reading even one chapter of a book, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you got to start somewhere, right? You got to start small and build up momentum, and even if it's one chapter of a book, right? Start with one page, like with any habit. Over time, just build it up.
Yeah, the goal isn't winning. It's kind of staying in the zone. It's kind of
Mhm.
staying in the action, and knowing that there is this difficult period where it's going to be uncomfortable, like you mentioned at
Yeah.
the gym, right? It hurts after you go to the gym, but then after you can take more weights, right? So
Yeah.
you can take heavy books and do your your reps with that, right?
Yeah.
Or you can read one chapter. No, maybe you read 2 pages. Okay, next day
Yeah.
three. Next day you can do eventually a full chapter, a full book, right?
Yeah. I think I just watched a video you sent me on Slack actually, which is like talking about doing the thing is not doing the thing, thinking about doing the thing is not doing the thing, telling people you're going to do the thing is not doing the thing. The only thing that doing the thing is doing the thing, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's so easy to convince ourselves that we're making a lot more progress than we actually are just by like thinking a lot about what we want to do rather than actually just doing it. And I think
Mhm.
that's where a lot of people run into trouble is just taking the action.
Yeah, and it's probably kind of demystifying the act of reading as either virtue signaling, as positive, as negative, as
Mhm.
it's neutral. It's a it's a book. It's a page with words. You probably by this time, even if you're a child, understand that language. One thing that is quite interesting, if you want to think about it, though, we talked about the printing press, and we've been able to reconstruct dialogues of thousands of years old, right? Probably reading a book will give you access to more knowledge, and more ancient, not always better, but different, than what you can see on your feed, right? And also different languages, because a lot of books are translated in 30, 40 languages. Not all social media are actually translated or translatable. And they can reach, we talked about Crime and Punishment written in Russian. I can tell you about Perfume, the story of a murder, written by Suskin in German. I read some books in Czech translated. I read, right, some Arabic, some Persian. Those are kind of the things that can make you want to read and explore all this diversity of space, time, language, culture. Isn't that
Mm.
like a new world that maybe we forgot, Mark?
Yeah. I think absolutely. Like, uh, it, and we can remind ourselves it's there, right? But I think most people just don't think about it because there's just so much going on in their lives.
Good. So, you know, let's go back to a few things that we talked about, and I have kind of a list of 10 levers that we can help you with for reading intention. Uh,
Mm.
the first is simply, and then you can comment on some or all of them, Mark. So the first is reintroduce boredom, um, unstructured, nothing time. You know, doesn't have to be reading. It can be silence. It can be, right. Just build that muscle of you don't need to be stimulated all the time. Then let's talk about process and not just the product or finish line. We talked about, you don't have to finish a chapter or finish a book. Are you actively picking up a book, trying to sit, or you can read a book standing. I've read books standing, or you can do.
The AI strikes again.
Yes, it does. So yeah, distraction. But let's go back to the traction. Build knowledge, not just reading skills. So it's not only about reading; it's like actually about comprehension, right? Are you affected by it cognitively, emotionally, um, and not just am I able to read X amount of word per minute, right? I think
Mhm.
that's important to figure out. Change your environment. Phone-free bedrooms. Apologize again for the phone disruption as I'm speaking this. Scaffold the struggle. So, what are the zones that are difficult, and how can we help? Right. So it's difficult to read the first page. Okay. So what will make it more enjoyable to get to that stage? And then the principle of educational scaffolding. Um, Protect sleep. We talked about sleep being affected and affecting screen time use and reading.
Mhm.
And maybe if you don't like reading too much at first, you'll read a book before going to sleep, and it will make you fall asleep, and that's great. So it'll help your
Mhm.
sleep. But next, maybe you'll read a chapter that's more interesting, and then you'll stay up all night, like you mentioned. Or I've done that a lot. Um,
Yeah.
but don't stay up all night every night. But if it's for you, go for that. Grant So seven, grant autonomy over what children read. As you mentioned, if you don't like the book, take another one. If you've
Let's
tried
drop it.
many books and it doesn't work, like take a jokes book, take a graphic novel, a manga, whatever makes them feel like, okay, I am some type of reader. Maybe I'm not reading Dostoevsky yet,
Yeah.
uh, or maybe I will never, but at least I'm reading, at least I'm engaging, at least I'm increasing my reading time, my comprehension, deeper thinking, right? Reading out loud, keep doing it. One of my biggest hack for relationships with your kids or even with your partner, uh, devices, you know, um, are not companions during your reading, right? So whenever you're reading, like throw your phone somewhere very far, be there
Phone
with,
free zone.
yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then the last thing, especially for parents and educator, explain the why, and maybe they won't get it right, but say why is it important to read? No one reads; it's not useful. No, make them cooperate, and also explain to them that the technology
Mhm.
that they're so addicted to are addictive on purpose, right? And that a 3D VR video game, the latest coolest stuff, um,
Yeah.
probably is not as enticing as a page with some words in it, right?
Yeah.
But once you're able to tell the story and switch the mindset and saying, well, that page has something in it. Maybe you don't see it yet, but
Yes.
go in the story, go into the information, and it might be more rewarding, right?
I think, it's also, sometimes a process of elimination, and what I mean by that is if people have struggle focusing, it's not the solution is not additive, it's
Yeah.
actually, um, reducing the amount of information that you're exposed to. So Jerry Seinfeld actually is famous for when he wrote Seinfeld, he was having writer's block and is struggling to even find motivation to start. And he literally went into a room, locked himself in the room with just a pencil and a pad of paper, and there was nothing else for him to do. So he said he preferred to write to start writing over just not having anything to do in that room, right? So try to eliminate as many distractions as possible. Sometimes it could be a matter of just locking your phone and your computer away and just having the book available, right? And that could be the thing that just like culminates in you reading a few pages or even a chapter. It's just showing up and doing something.
And another quick hack and an opportunity for connection. Might you be a student or a parent? If you're not driving to school or to work, and I can attest that I have read books on red lights when I was driving because
Mhm.
I was in some time where the book was so interesting. I was reading while driving, but not while driving in the red light. Um, why don't you start reading in the commute, right? If you're using public transport, how
Mhm.
many times do you see you're in whatever public transport, the bus, the train, the metro, and people are on their phone?
It's
Why don't you have
so
the
true.
courage to be that person that is actually looking at other people with awareness and saying, I'm the one who's reading, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's becoming more common. I've seen more and more people lately where I am on books, but maybe I might be wrong. There are also a lot of people on their phones.
Mhm. So, and any of those 10 levers that you find particularly um, interesting? We're talking about sleep, scaffolding, device default to change, building knowledge, not just resilience, and process over the outcome.
Yeah, I mean, one, sleep is just so important. Like, I think really poor sleep is such a huge trigger for a lot of mental illness and mental suffering. So make sure that you're going to sleep on time. And then regarding, building up reading as a habit.
Hmm.
Um, m- make it the first step as simple and obvious as possible. Is something that James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits as well. Is like make it visible and make it easy, right? If you want to start it. So put that book somewhere where you're going to see it, right? Even open the book to the page that you want to start on, and don't have the phone or the computer lying around. Take that away, put it in a different room entirely. And if you have a spouse, partner living with you, you can recruit them to help you and make you accountable
Yeah,
for reading that book.
that's great. We talked about our experience of reading. I have, as you probably know, like dog tagged, all types
Yeah,
of notes on my books, and writing physically with your hand. Also, motor helps you remember, comprehend the cognition. There's actually some science behind that. There's a landmark 2018 meta-analysis by Delgado and colleagues. The paper is called "Don't Throw Away Your Printed Books," right? And it looks at dozens of studies, and it shows that the comprehension of the text is worse on screen than on paper, right? And also it worsen with time, right? So don't throw away your printed books. I know you might think it's eco-friendly, but for your brain, books that are physical, printed, we talked about the printed press, are actually better for you. So here's a bit of science for you, Mark, and the audience.
if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat about reading or in general any of the things that we've spoken about today. Christian, do you have any final thoughts you want to give to the audience before we wrap this up today? Any things
Yeah.
that you want to leave with the audience?
So there is a problem that Gen Alpha and other generations are reading less. Some are reading massively less, some slightly less, but everyone is pretty much reading less as a whole.
Yeah.
We do have some quality content online on the internet and in social media. Hopefully, one of these conversations is quality content, and let us know if you think it is. As we're trying to bring the best, science and actionable tools for you for free. And also, there is some growing evidence that okay, reading is declining and it's affecting, as you mentioned, the lower part of the population. So more people are struggling, and the people that are doing good are doing good.
Mhm.
So, my final thoughts are, again, how can we collaborate with more communities, more organizations to have this not only awareness that we might also affect, education and legislation, link the parents, the school, the student in a kind of a same framework where we're working together and not against each other,
Yeah.
because we have less opportunities for reading, basically, right? And we just said, well, yeah, you can read on a park bench, you can read in at home before going to sleep, you can read if you're, for instance, you have to eat alone because um, whoever in the family, your friends or your coworker are not there. You can
Yeah.
read while eating instead of watching the TV or your screen on your phone, right? So I don't think the opportunities for reading are less. The opportunities of reading together are probably less. And I think it's our kind of mandate to say, well, parents, if you're not reading, that's okay, but maybe take a first step and do it with your children.
Mm.
And educators, if your students are not reading, ask them why. Explain to them that it might be for a different reason, and give them back, the passion, the traction, that to endure at first, going through suffering, reading a chapter or two or a whole book, and then saying, well, it's not only for the curriculum, it's actually for interacting in the world, using imagination, using comprehension, meta-linguistics, and make the story compelling to them, is my suggestion and final thoughts.
It's a beautiful note to end on. If you have full reading or if you know some younger generation alpha member having trouble with reading, please do not hesitate to reach out to Christian, me, or one of the many members of All Digital Wellness who are happy to be here to support you. Visit our website as well, alldigitalwellness.com, for more resources. Christian, it was a pleasure talking to you today. Next week, who do we have on the podcast?
We have a school principal.
There we go.
That
Speaking to people on the front lines next week. So next week's going to be an exciting conversation where we actually test what we were talking about with people who are actually experiencing the problem on a daily basis. So it's going to be very exciting. Feel free, tune in next time, next Friday, for the All Digital Wellness podcast. Thank you so much, Christian, for being here with me today.
Thank you, as always. It's been a pleasure. And let's make sure that we talk about our next meeting in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Thanks for encouraging people to read. Thanks for sharing some personal experience, as always, about you, your clients, and people around you. And thanks for the listeners for sticking till the end. Reach out to us for anything, for any suggestion, potential guests you want to see here. We're here for you guys. So thanks for following, subscribing, and sharing.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week. Bye-bye.